Okay, now we're moving into the question, should I one rep max? We've talked about RPE and RIR, talking about like, should I be going RP10? Should I be going all out Jordan, just grinding? Well, it depends. Like I said, in terms of definitions first, like in case someone's not familiar with a one rep max is, what that means is you're essentially putting on the max amount of weight and doing one single rep of that. So you're trying to get, the max amount of weight you can do. Essentially when we watch powerlifting competitions, they're doing one rep maxes, or trying to, at least, to lift as much as humanly possible. And so the question is, well, why would you do this, right? Well, like I said, first things first, if this is part of your sport, if you're a weightlifter or a powerlifter, then like you have to do it, right? There's no getting around that. You can't just be like, oh, I'm never going to do this, because on competition day, you have to do it. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to train specifically for that all the time, meaning like you have to do singles at RPE 10 or max out every single day. I think most people don't do that, but it's going to inherently be part of your program. That's just the way it goes. You have to get used to being underweight, and then you're also trying to lift as much weight to win the competition. So that has to happen. Additionally, if this is something you love, I know people who are like, I love maxing out. It's like my favorite thing. And high school Jordan would agree with that. Love doing that. Maybe not what I do now necessarily, but if this is like gets you out of bed in the morning, then I'm not going to say like don't do it, because I think there's some decent data that shows like powerlifting and weightlifting, they're pretty safe sports. And that's even when they're going hardcore. And so it's not something that I would not recommend doing every single day. But if you're just like, I love it and I want to do it, then I'm not here to stop you. Like you're a strong person, your body's capable, you can do it. For me, the risk reward is always the conversation, but that is another reason some people may want to do it. Another reason is to kind of help base, your percentages for your lift. Like we talked about, before, with auto regulation using RPE, some people use percentage based. So essentially they calculate off of their max. So their max squat is, 400 pounds. And then and the program calls for 90% of that. By having that max, where that 90% is. And, some people will do that and track that and base their programming off of that. So it's very valid to do. And you're not wrong by doing that at all, but that's another reason why maxing may be helpful. Okay. So you might be asking, well, what are actually the pros of this, Jordan? Well, first things first, like lifting heavy things is really fun. For some people, not for everyone, but it can be really fun when you're lifting something you feel like you've accomplished a lot. So that can be really helpful. Like I talked about before, you can get really accurate percentages, understanding, based off of your one rep max, you can kind of fill in your program off of that. So that can be super helpful as well. And then also, like I said, it's just nice to know where you're at, what your capability, what your limits are, and you kind of go from there. So, all right, there's definitely some pros, but there's also some cons as well. The first one everyone talks about is the risk for injury, right? I think it's fair to kind of think of that intuitively. There's probably a higher risk of maxing out than just doing regular lifting. If you think about it too, like if you're sprinting, you're just doing 75% versus 100, it was probably a high risk of you getting injured at 100%. It's just the way it works. When you're pushing your body to the absolute max, you're going to have some injuries or potential risk for that injury, and that can happen. So that's kind of the big one everyone talks about. Like I don't think it's necessarily that if you go one rep max, you're going to get hurt. Like we see that time and time again with people lifting all over the world that doesn't happen, but it kind of puts you closer to the edge there. It's that risk benefit ratio, right? Like, is this worth it for me or not? So that's number one. Number two, it can actually be a big fatigue load on you. Like if you do maxing out, if you've ever done a true max out, like you are like wiped after that. You're just like, man, your whole body's just like, holy cow. And so doing that a lot can lead to a lot of fatigue. And if we have a lot of fatigue, that means we have to recover from that fatigue. And so it might kind of impact the future workouts that we have or how we're feeling that day or that week or whatnot. And so that's just something to always consider as well. And then finally too, if you're maxing and you're not improving, it can be really demoralizing. And we're not trying to have anybody have a demoralizing thing, but if you start off on maxing before a cycle, do a whole cycle and get no improvement, you're like, what the heck? That's good knowledge. That's good information to know. But it can be demoralizing. And I think there's other ways to probably know if you're making progress instead of one rep maxing. But those are kind of the big cons I think about most people will talk about as well. Okay, so what do I recommend? Well, I think for the vast majority of people, you don't need to do one rep maxing. I think it just probably doesn't make sense from a risk reward benefit. Obviously, like I said, if you're a powerlifter, you're a weightlifter, you have to do it. But I think for most people who just want to lift to be healthy and be active and are lifelong athletes, I don't think you need to do one rep max. Like I said, some people love it and it's what gets them up in the morning. That's good, go for it. But for me, the risk reward's just not there. I think there's lots of other ways that you can monitor progress. I think if you are doing exercises we're in the RPE range of like, anywhere from like 7, 8, maybe 9, and you're getting, feeling you're increasing weight there or you're increasing reps or it's just easier, like subjectively. I mean, there's so many ways to say like, hey, I'm making progress rather than saying, hey, this one load, this is everything. And for me, like the reason I'm not a huge fan of one rep maxing is just because, you're putting so much importance on one number. Whereas, like I said, if you go to the gym one day and you're supposed to hit this number and you don't, it's like, oh, what a bad day. Whereas, otherwise, if you just kind of auto-regulate, you can say, okay, I'm going for this stimulus and I get it. That's fine. We'll go from there. Like I said, I have a very long-term perspective of working out. And for me, it's like, hey, how can I keep working out, 40 years from now? So that's kind of my goal. And some people have, more myopic kind of views on that, and they want to get this number now, and that's totally fine. Like I said, for the vast majority of people, I don't think one rep maxing is necessary. It's certainly not necessary for hypertrophy or strength gains. I think we've seen that time and time again in the literature that you can work, anywhere that makes, as long as you're giving like a good effort and you're having some stimulus, like I said, RPE, 6 up to 9, anywhere in that range, you're probably going to be okay. But as long as we're working hard and challenging the muscles, you can have strength and hypertrophy gain. You do not need to do one rep maxing. And so that's why for me, it's like you can get all these benefits that we want, and we don't have to put the stress, the strain, and the injury risk with one rep maxes. So for me, it's just, I don't do them. Like I said, if that's what you want to do and that's part of your program, I think you can be a healthy athlete and a lifelong athlete while doing that. But for me, that's just something that I don't necessarily do on a regular basis. In fact, what I think can be helpful sometimes is kind of work up towards it, right? Like working up, like you're going to one rep max and then just pull back just a little bit. I know there's some people who talk about, like in terms of sprinting, like unless you're a track athlete, just doing 90 to 95% sprints. If you want to do sprint workouts, like you get most of the benefits, but like without as much, the 100% risk. And I think it's the same thing for lifting. You get most of the benefits working up to those challenging sets. You get the vast majority of the benefits there, and you don't have to like grind out to get everything at the end because you're getting all the benefits there. So once again, risk rewards, but hey, it is what it is. So if you're telling me like, Jordan, I don't care what you say, I'm going to maxing his life. That's fine, man. Let's talk about how we might be able to do that safely. The first things first is you got to warm up, right? I need you to warm up, an excessive warm, and not just your normal, like, hey, okay, let's just go a little bit, but we're going to really ramp up and build towards it. Building a warm up is a whole other probably podcast or topic in and of itself. But I think the big thing is you have to do lots of reps of what you're going to do. So if you squat, you've got to progressively get up there until you're feeling good, and you've got to kind of prime your body and your central nervous system to get ready for it. So warming up, super, super important. Another thing that's super important is, having safety in mind, right? I don't want you to necessarily just be doing a bench press by yourself and just boom, you're locked in and you can't get up and you're struggling. Having either safety spotters or having someone behind you to spot as well can be super important. So just understanding the logistics of it, like what do you do? How do you bail? How do we properly bail? All those things. And so having safety in mind is also really important. And additionally too, what I don't recommend is just starting off your workout, journey with a one rep max. We definitely don't need to do that. Some people are like, oh, I want to see where I'm at. Like, don't do that. I think the smartest way to do a one rep max is to kind of do it after you've slowly built up and you kind of accumulated all those reps, right? So you've done that movement time and time again. You've, increased your load. You want to see where you're at in your capacity. That's fine. But do it at the end of a cycle, not necessarily right away to start and giving yourself a huge amount of fatigue. Obviously, if you're a lifter who's been doing it a long, long time, it kind of things ever mesh together, right? Like when are you beginning and when are you ending? That never no one can truly tell. But if you're anywhere on like the beginner side of things, there's no reason to necessarily have to max out to start. I would say make your progress, continue to go. And then if you need to do it towards the end, not in the front side of things.